In the sprawling estate of Baron von Reichenbach, privilege and class divide the world as sharply as the ornate iron gates divide the manicured gardens from the peasant villages beyond. Young Lord Edmund, the Baron's only son, walks these grounds with the entitled confidence of one who has never known hardship. His silk waistcoats and perfectly powdered wigs stand in stark contrast to the humble servants who bow as he passes. Among them is Clara, a kitchen girl with calloused hands and quiet dignity, who endures his casual cruelty with a strength he cannot comprehend. What Edmund doesn't know is that beneath her mud-stained apron lies a heart braver than any soldier in his father's regiment, and a secret that will soon shatter his world completely. What could a simple servant girl possibly have done to earn the undying gratitude of one of the most powerful men in the province? Morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors of Reichenbach Manor. Footmen in pristine livery hurried through the grand hall, polishing brass fixtures and straightening portraits of stern-faced ancestors who seemed to judge their every movement with painted eyes. At the heart of the estate hung the von Reichenbach family portrait, commissioned 5 years prior. Baron Friedrich von Reichenbach stood tall in his military regalia, medals gleaming against the dark fabric. Beside him, an empty space carefully painted with a backdrop of curtains marked where the Baroness should have stood. She had succumbed to fever when Edmund was 12. Instead, young Lord Edmund stood alone beside his father, chin raised, eyes hard beyond his 16 years. Now 21, Edmund strode through the east wing, boots clicking against marble. The morning ritual never varied. Breakfast at precisely 8, correspondence until 10, then riding until luncheon. The predictability pleased him, order befitting nobility. "My lord." A footman bowed as Edmund passed. Edmund acknowledged him with the barest nod, not bothering to recall the man's name. The breakfast room overlooked the rose garden. Baron Friedrich's pride. The older man was already seated, reviewing papers through spectacles that seemed too delicate for his weathered face. "You're late," the Baron noted without looking up. "By 3 minutes, father." Edmund signaled for coffee. "Hardly worth mention." Friedrich folded his papers. Punctuality separates civilization from chaos. His voice carried the hoarseness that had lingered since his illness, a mysterious affliction that had nearly claimed his life 6 months prior. "How are your preparations for the anniversary celebration?" Friedrich asked. Edmund stirred his coffee. "Proceeding as expected. The guest list includes 27 nobles from the province. Governor Hesse sends regrets." "A pity." The Baron's knife sliced precisely through his food. "And the special arrangements I requested?" Edmund frowned. "The servants will receive an extra ration of wine and an evening of leisure the following day. Though I fail to see why we're celebrating your recovery with such extravagance." Friedrich's eyes hardened. "When death introduces itself then departs, one develops appreciation for those who ushered it away." A maid entered with fresh bread, nearly colliding with Edmund's chair. She stepped back quickly, murmuring apologies, head bowed. "Mind yourself," Edmund snapped, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve. "Or find employment elsewhere." The girl, plain-featured with brown hair tucked beneath a cap, kept her eyes down. "Yes, my lord. Forgive me." As she arranged the breadbasket, Edmund noticed her hands reddened, calloused, with curious burn scars across the palms. He looked away, vaguely disgusted. Friedrich watched the exchange with narrowed eyes. "Clara," he addressed her directly, causing Edmund to look up in surprise. "Is the special tea prepared for this afternoon?" "Yes, Baron." Her voice was soft but clear, lacking the typical servant's fearful tremor. "Fresh herbs as requested." "Very good." Friedrich nodded. "Bring it to my study at 4. She curtsied and withdrew, leaving Edmund staring at his father. "You know the kitchen maid by name?" Friedrich buttered his bread with deliberate movements. "I know the names of many in my household, but you never—" Edmund stopped himself. "She prepares medicine for you?" "A tea blend," quite effective for the lingering weakness in my lung. Friedrich changed subjects. Your cousin Augustus arrives tomorrow. I expect you'll entertain him appropriately. Edmund nodded, still puzzled by his father's interaction with the maid. Since recovering from his illness, Friedrich had shown subtle changes in his management of the estate, taking greater interest in the servants' welfare, visiting the kitchens personally, even instructing the steward to improve the staff quarters. After breakfast, Edmund retreated to the library, selecting a volume more for appearance than interest. Through the window he observed his father in the garden, walking slowly with his cane. Surprisingly, the kitchen maid, Clara, appeared on the gravel path, carrying a basket. More surprising still, his father greeted her with a genuine smile, rare even with noble visitors. They spoke briefly, Friedrich nodding at whatever information she provided. Before they parted, the Baron patted her shoulder, a gesture of familiarity that left Edmund speechless. No von Reichenbach had ever touched servants beyond necessity for generations. As Clara walked back toward the kitchen, Edmund watched her curiously. She moved with unusual purpose for a servant, back straight, steps measured. Unlike other maids who giggled or gossiped when away from supervision, she maintained a quiet dignity that seemed oddly out of place. "What hold do you have over him?" Edmund murmured to the window glass. For the first time, he found himself truly curious about someone from below stairs. Dawn broke 3 hours earlier for those below stairs. Clara woke at 4, shivering in the narrow attic room she shared with 2 other kitchen maids. Frost patterns decorated the small window, beautiful but foreboding. Winter clung stubbornly to the province despite spring's official arrival. She dressed quickly in the darkness, fingers automatically finding the wooden pendant hanging from a leather cord around her neck. Carved by her mother's hands 15 years ago, the simple wildflower design was her only inheritance. Clara's thumb traced the familiar grooves, a morning ritual that connected her to memories growing fainter with each passing year. The servants' staircase creaked beneath her feet as she descended 4 flights to the kitchens. Already the massive hearth blazed with morning fire, Mrs. Holtz orchestrating the day's first bread loaves. "There you are, girl." The cook's voice was gruff but not unkind. In her 50 years at Reichenbach Manor, Mrs. Holtz had developed an exterior as tough as overcooked meat, but harbored unexpected tenderness beneath. "Water needs fetching, then start on the breakfast vegetables." Clara nodded, grabbing 2 buckets. Outside, the well stood in the servants' courtyard, a humble square of cobblestones surrounded by utility buildings, laundry, woodshed, stables. Kitchen boys hauled firewood, while laundry maids yawned over steaming tubs. Everyone moved with practiced efficiency, invisible machinery that kept the great house functioning. Back in the kitchen, Clara washed vegetables, her scarred hands reddening in the cold water. Around her, the staff exchanged morning gossip. "Lady Wiseman's daughter eloped with her music tutor," whispered Greta, a parlour maid. "Imagine the scandal." "Young Lord Augustus arrives today," announced Thomas, a footman. "Last time he broke 3 crystal glasses and blamed it on me." Clara listened silently, content to absorb information without contributing. Her quiet nature was mistaken for shyness or slowness by many in the household, an assumption she never corrected. Observation served her well. People revealed much when they believed themselves unwatched. "Clara," Miss Holtz called, "take these herbs and start the Baron's special tea mixture." In the corner workspace, Clara carefully measured dried herbs into a mortar. Chamomile for inflammation, thyme for cough, elderberry for strength. Her mother had been an herbalist in their village before fever took her, leaving 10-year-old Clara orphaned. Those early lessons in identifying plants and their properties remained Clara's most treasured knowledge. "What concoction are you brewing now?" Miss Holtz asked quietly, checking that no other servants were within earshot. "The Baron's lungs need strengthening after winter." Clara crushed the herbs with practiced movements. "This blend helps clear the remaining congestion." Mrs. Holtz nodded, watching Clara's skilled hands. "Your mother would be proud of how you've used her teachings." Clara's lips curved in a small smile. Mrs. Holtz was the only person at Reichenbach who knew of her background and abilities. The cook had recognized Clara's knowledge of herbs years ago and quietly encouraged it, sometimes providing rare ingredients from the market town. "The Baron trusts your remedies more than the physicians now," Mrs. Holtz observed. "Not that he tells anyone. It's better that way." Clara transferred the crushed herbs to a jar. "People fear what they don't understand." Their conversation halted as the steward entered, delivering the day's instructions. Staff scattered to their assignments. Clara signed to polish silver for the upcoming celebration. In the polishing room, Clara worked alongside 3 housemaids, their chatter flowing around her like water around a stone. "Young Lord Edmund had Betsy in tears again," said Agnes, the oldest maid, "all because she used the wrong brush on his riding boots." "He's handsome enough," sighed Marie, "but cold as January." "His mother's death changed him," Agnes explained. "He was a different child before," laughed Moore. Clara kept her head down, methodically removing tarnish from ornate silverware. She'd experienced Lord Edmund's disdain firsthand during her 3 years at Reichenbach. Unlike his father, who treated servants with distant courtesy, Edmund seemed to resent their very presence. Last week he'd mocked her hands when she delivered firewood to the library. "Do try not to touch anything valuable," he drawled, eyeing her rough palms with distaste. "Though I suppose it's difficult to tell what's dirt and what's simply you." The other maids had giggled nervously while Clara stood expressionless, waiting to be dismissed. She'd learned early that reaction only encouraged cruelty. Her thoughts were interrupted when Marie nudged her. "Clara, they say you attend the Baron daily now. What's he really like when no one's watching?" Clara focused on the silver spoon in her hand. "He's simply a man in recovery, nothing remarkable." The lie came easily. What passed between her and Baron Friedrich remained private, their silent agreement. Some truths were best kept hidden, especially when they crossed the unbreakable boundaries between servant and master. Hooves pounded across the countryside, Edmund and his cousin Augustus racing their mounts over rolling hills. Rain had fallen the previous night, leaving the ground soft and muddy, perfect for displaying horsemanship. Edmund leaned forward in the saddle, urging his stallion faster, the familiar thrill of competition burning in his chest. "You've lost your edge, cousin," Augustus called, pulling ahead. Edmund smirked, withdrawing his riding crop from its holder. The tooled leather handle bore the von Reichenbach crest, an eagle with outstretched wings. One sharp crack near his horse's flank sent the animal surging forward, muscles bunching as they overtook Augustus. They thundered through the estate's rear entrance, sending stable boys scrambling. Edmund dismounted with practiced grace, tossing the reins carelessly to a waiting groom. "Have him properly cooled down," Edmund ordered, still breathless from the ride, "and polish my saddle before tomorrow." Augustus joined him, mud splattered across his riding clothes. "Shall we clean up before luncheon? Your father dislikes tardiness." "My father dislikes everything," Edmund replied, leading the way inside. They entered through a side door, tracking mud across freshly polished floors. Edmund noticed but continued without pause. Servants existed to clean such messes. As they reached the main hall, a sharp voice rang out. "Young masters." Mrs. Weber, the housekeeper, appeared from a doorway, her face pinched with disapproval. The floors were just polished this morning. Augustus had the grace to look chastened, but Edmund merely raised an eyebrow. "And they'll be polished again, I expect." "We can hardly hover above the ground, Mrs. Weber." The housekeeper pursed her lips. "I'll send someone immediately." She disappeared, muttering about inconsiderate young men. Edmund continued toward the stairs, but paused when he noticed Clara kneeling nearby, sorting linens. "You there, Clara, isn't it? Mrs. Weber will need you to clean this mud. Be thorough." Clara looked up, her expression carefully neutral. "Yes, sir, although I'm assigned to the Baron's medicinal preparations this afternoon." Edmund's mouth tightened. "The floor takes precedence," My father's tea can wait." Without waiting for response, Edmund and Augustus climbed the stairs, leaving muddy footprints on each step. 30 minutes later, freshly changed and groomed, Edmund descended to find Clara still scrubbing the marble floor. She worked methodically, hands red from the harsh soap and cold water. Edmund paused, watching her. "You missed a spot," he pointed with his boot to a clean section of floor. Clara glanced up and returned to her work, without comment. Something about her calm indifference irritated him. Servants usually displayed appropriate nervousness in his presence. "I understand my father has made you his personal herbalist," Edmund said. "Quite an elevation for a kitchen maid." "I only prepare his tea, my lord." Her voice remained neutral, neither proud nor apologetic. Edmund circled her, noting how she kept her scarred hands lowered, racially hidden in the cleaning rags. "With those filthy hands, I'm surprised he doesn't fall ill from your remedies rather than improve." Clara wrung out her cloth in the bucket, the water turning brown with mud. As she reached for a clean section of floor, her elbow bumped a small table, holding a porcelain figurine, a shepherd with his flock, delicately painted and worth more than a servant's yearly wage. The figurine wobbled. Clara lunged to catch it, but it slipped through her wet fingers, shattering against the marble floor. Silence fell. Clara stared at the broken pieces, her composed expression finally cracking to reveal genuine dismay. "Clumsy and filthy," Edmund said coldly. "An impressive combination." Clara gathered the porcelain fragments with trembling hands. "I apologize, my lord. I'll accept whatever consequences." "You certainly will," Edmund interrupted, withdrawing his riding crop and slapping it against his palm. "That piece was from Meissen, brought back by my grandfather. Its value exceeds your understanding." Clara's eyes fixed on the riding crop, but she didn't cower. "I understand value, my lord. A week's wages should begin to cover it," Edmund decided. "And you'll report to Mrs. Weber for additional duties each evening for a month." Edmund, Baron Friedrich's voice cut through the tension. He stood at the end of the hall, leaning on his cane, face shadowed with disapproval. "What's happened here?" "This girl broke the Meissen shepherd," Edmund explained, gesturing to the fragments. "Carelessness." Friedrich approached slowly, his gaze moving from the broken porcelain to Clara's carefully neutral expression. "Accidents occur. The punishment seems excessive for a momentary slip." Edmund frowned. "Father, that piece was—" "I know what it was," Friedrich interrupted. "I also know it can be replaced." He turned to Clara. "Return to your regular duties. No wages will be deducted." Clara curtsied deeply. "Thank you, Baron." Friedrich nodded. "And don't forget my tea at 4 o'clock. "Yes, Baron." She gathered her cleaning supplies and departed swiftly, leaving Edmund staring at his father in confusion. "You continually favor that girl," Edmund observed. "Why?" Friedrich's expression remained unreadable. "Perhaps I simply value competence over birth, on occasions, a quality you might consider cultivating." He turned and walked away, leaving Edmund holding his riding crop, surrounded by muddy footprints and broken porcelain. Bells jingled softly throughout the servants' hall, each with a distinct tone corresponding to different rooms in the manor. The intricate bell system, brass fixtures connected to wires that ran through the walls, transformed the simplest pull in an upstairs room into immediate summons below. Servants paused mid-conversation, eyes darting to the wall of bells to see which master required attention. The small bell labeled Baron's study gave a gentle ring. "That'll be for Clara," said Thomas, a footman, without looking up from polishing silver. "Always for Clara these days." In the corner, Clara set aside the vegetables she'd been preparing and wiped her hands on her apron. Holtz handed her a tray already prepared with the Baron's medicinal tea. "Third time today," remarked Greta, eyeing Clara suspiciously. "What exactly do you do in that study?" Clara accepted the tray silently, ignoring the question. "Leave her be," Mrs. Holtz said firmly. "The Baron's recovery requires regular attention." As Clara ascended the servants' staircase, whispers followed her. She was nobody 6 months ago, Greta continued, voice lowered but intentionally audible. Just another kitchen maid. Now she's practically the Baron's shadow. Perhaps she provides sitting comfort for the old man, suggested a stable hand, prompting nervous laughter. Mrs. Holtz slammed a pot onto the table. Enough! I'll have no filth spoken in my kitchen. Back to work, all of you. The room reluctantly returned to its duties, but glances followed Clara's departure. Upstairs, Clara delivered the tea to Baron Friedrich, who accepted it with a nod. Close the door, please. Clara obeyed, then stood waiting as he sipped the steaming liquid. Excellent as always, he commented. The tightness in my chest has lessened considerably. The improvement should continue if you maintain the regimen, sir, Clara replied. Friedrich gestured to a chair, an unheard-of invitation for a servant. After a moment's hesitation, Clara perched on its edge. Your knowledge surpasses our physicians, Friedrich observed. Tell me again where you learned these remedies. My mother was skilled with herbs, sir. Before her death, she taught me to recognize plants and their properties. Friedrich nodded thoughtfully. A valuable education, more useful than much of what passes for learning among the nobility. He set down his cup. You may go. Return at the same time tomorrow. Clara curtsied and left, nearly colliding with Edmund in the hallway. He stepped back, eyeing her suspiciously. Another private audience, he asked. Just delivering the Baron's tea, my lord. Clara kept her eyes lowered. Edmund watched her descend the servants' staircase before entering his father's study. Friedrich was reviewing correspondence, seemingly absorbed. You spend considerable time with that girl, Edmund remarked. Friedrich didn't look up. Clara has been instrumental in my recovery. So I've gathered. The staff talks of little else. This caught Friedrich's attention. What do they say? Edmund shrugged elegantly. Speculation. Questions about her sudden elevation. Wondering what services she provides. Friedrich's face hardened. You will immediately silence any inappropriate gossip. Clara is to be treated with respect. Why? She's a servant like any other. She is not. Friedrich's tone left no room for argument. This discussion is concluded. Back below stairs, Clara returned to the kitchen to find conversation abruptly halt upon her entrance. She continued to her workspace, keenly aware of eyes following her movements. Mrs. Holtz approached, speaking quietly. They're curious, that's all. Mystery breeds speculation. I've done nothing to encourage it, Clara replied softly. Sometimes doing nothing speaks loudest. Mrs. Holtz glanced around the kitchen. The Baron's favor has made you a target. Be careful. Later that evening, while servants gathered for their meal, Clara sat slightly apart, aware of the invisible wall that had formed between her and the others. My sister works at the Hesse estate, said Bridget, a laundry maid. Says the Baron was all but pronounced dead last winter. Physician had given up hope. She looked pointedly at Clara, then miraculously recovered. Clara continued eating without risk. Strange how he fell ill so suddenly, added Thomas. Some said poison, though it was hushed up. Ridiculous. Mrs. Holtz interrupted. Who would poison the Baron? Those with something to gain, Thomas replied. The neighboring estates have coveted Reichenbach lands for generations. In the shadowed corridor outside, Edmund stood listening, his presence unnoticed by the servants. He'd come to speak with the steward, but paused at the mention of poison. Whatever happened, Bridget continued. Clara appeared just after the Baron took ill, and now she's the only one allowed to prepare his medicines. Coincidence, Mrs. Holtz said firmly. Perhaps, Bridget shrugged. Or perhaps our Clara knows more than she tells. Edmund leaned closer, intrigued despite himself. I know only herbs, Clara's quiet voice finally responded. The Baron values that knowledge, nothing more. If that's true, Thomas asked, why does he watch you like you hung the moon? Why did he insist you attend the anniversary celebration as a guest? A collective gasp circled the table. Edmund withdrew silently, thoughts churning. His father had mentioned nothing about including a servant in the celebration. Yet somehow it felt strangely plausible, given Friedrich's recent behavior. As he climbed the grand staircase, Edmund found himself increasingly preoccupied with the puzzle of Clara and his father, a mystery that seemed to deepen with each passing day. Ivory parchment cards with gold leaf borders lay arranged on Edmund's desk, each bearing the von Reichenbach crest, stamped in crimson wax. The formal invitation read, "Baron Friedrich von Reichenbach requests the honor of your presence to celebrate his recovery and return to health. An evening of dining and dancing will commence at 7 o'clock. Edmund reviewed the guest list one final time before handing the invitations to the waiting footman. "Ensure these are delivered personally, not left with servants." "Yes, my lord." The footman bowed and departed. Edmund moved to the window overlooking the front courtyard, where a flurry of activity had transformed the normally sedate estate. Deliverymen unloaded crates of wine and exotic fruits. Gardeners trimmed hedges into perfect geometric shapes. Even the fountain had been cleaned, water sparkling in the spring sunlight. A knock interrupted his observations. "Enter." Herr Müller, the steward, appeared with account ledgers. "The final expenditures for the celebration, my lord. Your approval is required." Edmund scanned the figures, eyebrows rising. "This exceeds the initial budget by nearly 30%. The Baron insisted on several additions," Müller explained. "Additional musicians, the finest wines from France rather than local vineyards, and," he hesitated, "and," Edmund prompted, "special arrangements for certain staff to attend as guests." Edmund set down the ledger. "You mean Clara?" "Yes, my lord. The Baron has ordered a dress commissioned from Madame Leron in the village. Quite fine quality." Edmund frowned. "Inappropriate doesn't begin to describe it. Has my father lost his senses completely?" "I wouldn't presume to judge, my lord." Miller's neutral tone barely concealed his agreement. After approving the accounts, Edmund sought out his father, finding him in the garden pavilion with Clara. They sat across from each other at a small table covered with books. Not novels or poetry, but medical texts. Friedrich appeared to be instructing her, pointing to illustrations of the human body. Edmund cleared his throat loudly. Friedrich looked up, seemingly unsurprised. "Edmund, join us. I prefer not to interrupt your tutorial." Edmund couldn't keep the edge from his voice. Clara gathered the books immediately. "I should return to my duties, Baron. Continue your reading this evening," Friedrich instructed. "Tomorrow we'll discuss the circulatory system further." She curtsied to both men and departed, clutching the leather-bound volume to her chest. Edmund watched her go before turning to his father. "You're educating a kitchen maid in medicine now. Clara has natural talent and intelligence. It would be wasteful not to cultivate it. And dressing her for the celebration, having her attend as a guest, that crosses Margins' eccentricity into impropriety." Friedrich's expression hardened. "You presume to lecture me on propriety in my own home. Someone must. When you enough." Friedrich raised a hand. "Clara will attend. The matter is settled." Before Edmund could respond, hoofbeats announced a new arrival. Through the garden archway, they watched Viscount James Harrington dismount in the courtyard. Tall, fashionably dressed, with calculating eyes, Harrington represented everything Edmund admired in nobility: confidence, refinement, and unwavering belief in natural hierarchies. "Harrington arrives early," Friedrich observed with noticeably less enthusiasm. "I invited him to stay the week. His family's connection to Governor Hesse will be useful." Friedrich nodded reluctantly. "See to your guest then. We'll continue this discussion later." Edmund gladly escaped to welcome Harrington, leading him through the grand entrance where servants hurried to collect his luggage. "Magnificent as always, Edmund," Harrington commented, surveying the marble hall. The celebration preparations seem well underway. "Nearly complete," Edmund confirmed, "though my father insists on certain unusual elements." Harrington raised an eyebrow. "Oh, enlighten me." As they ascended the stairs, Edmund explained his father's peculiar relationship with Clara. Harrington listened with growing amusement. A servant attending as a guest? How delightfully eccentric. It's inappropriate, Edmund insisted. She'll be completely out of place. Harrington smiled. Is she pretty? This miraculous healer? Plain. Unremarkable. Then what's the harm? Consider it a curiosity for your guests. The miraculous servant girl who saved the Baron's life, like exhibiting a particularly clever hunting dog. Edmund frowned at the comparison but couldn't entirely dismiss it. Perhaps. Later that afternoon, Edmund encountered Clara in the library, reaching for a medical text on a high shelf. He observed her for a moment, noticing how she handled the books with unexpected care and familiarity. Do you actually understand those texts? Or merely pretend to please my father? He asked suddenly. Clara startled but composed herself quickly. I understand more than I did 6 months ago, my lord. And what exactly transpired 6 months ago? Edmund approached closer. When my father nearly died and you mysteriously appeared. Clara's fingers tightened on the book. I was transferred from kitchen duties to assist with the Baron's recovery. Why you? What qualified a kitchen maid for such responsibility? Her eyes met his directly, a boldness no servant should display. Perhaps you should ask the Baron, my lord. Edmund stepped closer, invading her space deliberately. I'm asking you. For a moment, something flickered in Clara's eyes, fear, determination, or perhaps defiance. Then she lowered her gaze appropriately. I simply did what anyone would do when seeing someone in need, she said softly. Now if you'll excuse me, the Baron expects me to prepare his evening tea. She slipped past him, leaving Edmund with more questions than answers, and the lingering scent of herbs in the air. Morning dew clung to the Baron's prized roses, their crimson petals unfurling in the gentle spring sunshine. The rose garden, situated in a sheltered corner of the estate grounds, represented 3 generations of careful cultivation. Varieties from across Europe grew in meticulous arrangements, some bred specifically for the von Reichenbach estate, and found nowhere else. Clara moved carefully between the bushes, pruning shears in hand, examining each plant with practiced attention. She wore gardening gloves to protect her already scarred hands as she trimmed dead growth and shaped new buds. The head gardener had long ago relinquished this particular duty after noticing the Baron's unusual insistence that Clara be allowed to tend his roses. Though initially reluctant, the old gardener had eventually acknowledged her gentle skill with the temperamental flowers. Clara paused to admire a particularly vibrant bloom, its deep red color almost luminous in the morning light. Lost in contemplation, she didn't notice Edmund's approach until his shadow fell across the flowers. Another responsibility bestowed upon you, he observed. From kitchen to sickroom to garden. Quite the promotion. Clara straightened, shears still in hand. Good morning, my lord. The Baron mentioned his roses needed attention. Did he indeed? Edmund circled her slowly, examining her work. Strange that he trusts his prized blooms to someone with no formal training in horticulture. Plants are not so different from people, my lord. Clara replied, returning to her pruning. They require patience, attention, and understanding of their particular needs. Edmund reached out to touch a nearby rose. And you understand my father's particular needs so well. Clara's hands stilled, but her expression remained neutral. I understand his medical requirements, yes. That's not what I meant. Edmund stepped closer. 6 months ago you were nothing. A nameless kitchen girl. Now you prepare my father's medicines, share his private conversations, and will attend his celebration as a guest. The entire household whispers about your unprecedented rise. I'm sorry if it causes discomfort. Not discomfort, suspicion. Edmund moved directly in front of her. What hold do you have over him? What service did you provide that earned such extraordinary favor? Clara met his gaze directly. I helped him when he needed it. Nothing more. Impossible. My father has never shown such interest in any servant. He's educating you, protecting you, treating you almost as an equal. Perhaps he simply recognizes that worth isn't determined solely by birth. The words escaped before Clara could reconsider their wisdom. Edmund's expression darkened. "Careful, girl. Remember your place." "I know my place perfectly well, Lord Edmund." Clara's voice remained soft, but gained unexpected resolve. "It is exactly where your father has placed me." Edmund took the pruning shears from her hands, examining them. "You speak with remarkable confidence for someone whose hands tell a peasant's story." "Hands can tell many stories. Not all are immediately apparent." Edmund studied her, truly looked at her perhaps for the first time. Her features were ordinary enough, neither beautiful nor plain, but something in her composure suggested unexpected depth. Her eyes, brown with flecks of amber, held intelligence that contradicted her station. "You're educated," he realized suddenly, "beyond what servants typically receive. My mother taught me to read. The rest I've learned through opportunity. Opportunity provided by my father." Edmund handed back the shears. "Why? What makes you worthy of such special consideration?" Clara hesitated, seemingly weighing her response. "Perhaps that question should be directed to the Baron. I've tried. He refuses clear answers. Then perhaps there are none to be given." Clara turned back to the roses. Edmund grabbed her arm, forcing her to face him. "Don't play games with me. What happened 6 months ago? Why does my father treat the physician who saved his life with less regard than he shows you?" Clara's composure faltered momentarily. "Please, my lord. Some matters are not mine to discuss." "You mean he's sworn you to secrecy?" Edmund's grip tightened. "What conspiracy have you entered into with my father?" "No conspiracy, just—" She struggled to find appropriate words. "Just a promise." Before Edmund could press further, a harsh coughing echoed from nearby. They both turned to see Baron Friedrich leaning heavily against a garden wall, handkerchief pressed to his mouth. Clara instantly pulled free from Edmund's grasp and rushed to the Baron's side. "Sir, you shouldn't be outside without your coat. The morning air is still too cold for your lungs." Friedrich nodded, still coughing. When he pulled the handkerchief away, Edmund glimpsed bright spots of blood. "Father!" Edmund moved forward in alarm. Clara was already supporting the Baron, guiding him toward the house. "Please fetch hot water and brandy to his study," she instructed Edmund, momentarily forgetting proprieties in her concern. To his own surprise, Edmund found himself obeying, hurrying ahead to the house, while Clara helped his father along the garden path, her conversation with him soft but urgent. By the time Edmund returned with the requested items, Clara had settled Friedrich into his chair and was preparing some concoction from vials in a small wooden box she'd retrieved from a cabinet. "Will he be all right?" Edmund asked, watching his father's labored breathing with genuine concern. Clara nodded, focused on measuring precise amounts of liquid into a cup. The exertion and cold air triggered the weakness in his lungs. "This will ease the immediate symptoms." Friedrich drank the mixture without question, his complete trust in Clara more apparent than ever. Edmund watched in silent confusion, torn between suspicion of Clara and gratitude for her obvious care for his father. Friedrich's bedchamber had been transformed into something resembling an apothecary. An ornate mahogany medicine box sat open on the bedside table, its compartments filled with vials, powders, and dried herbs. The box, a gift from the Baron to himself, following his recovery, featured intricate carvings of healing plants and Latin inscriptions about health and longevity. Edmund stood at the threshold, watching Clara prepare a remedy. His father lay propped against pillows, complexion ashen from the morning's episode. "The bleeding has stopped," Clara reported quietly, measuring herbs into a mortar. "But your lungs need rest, no excitement for at least 2 days." Friedrich nodded wearily. "The celebration should proceed as planned, provided you rest until then." Edmund stepped forward. "Perhaps we should postpone. Your health is more important than social obligations." "Nonsense." Friedrich's voice, though weakened, retained its authority. This celebration marks my recovery. Cancelling would only fuel rumors of my demise. Clara ground the herbs with practiced efficiency, then added the powder to steaming water. The pungent aroma of thyme and other plants Edmund couldn't identify filled the room. "This will reduce inflammation," she explained, helping Friedrich sit up to drink. Edmund watched in silent fascination. Clara moved with the confidence of a physician, not a servant. Her hands, so often the target of his mockery, demonstrated remarkable dexterity and skill as she measured, mixed and administered the medicine. "How severe is his condition?" Edmund asked when his father had finished drinking and closed his eyes to rest. Clara gathered empty vials into the medicine box. "The poison damaged his lungs permanently. He improves with proper care, but certain triggers, cold air, exertion, strong emotions can cause setbacks." "Poison," Edmund repeated, startled by her casual confirmation of the servant's gossip. Clara's hands froze momentarily. "The Baron hasn't discussed this with you. He mentioned only a mysterious illness." Clara looked toward Friedrich, who nodded slightly without opening his eyes. "Tell him, it's time he knew." She closed the medicine box carefully before meeting Edmund's gaze. "6 months ago, your father was poisoned, deliberately. The substance attacked his lungs and blood. When the physician declared him beyond help, I recognized the symptoms and prepared an antidote. How could you possibly recognize a poison that confounded our physician? My mother worked with herbs. Not all who sought her knowledge did so for healing." Clara's voice held a hint of old pain. "I learned to identify many substances by their effects." Edmund struggled to absorb this revelation. "Who administered the poison?" "We don't know with certainty," Friedrich answered, eyes still closed. "An investigation continues quietly. And you kept this from me? I'm your heir, your son." Friedrich opened his eyes. "To protect you, Edmund. If someone targeted me, they might target you next." Edmund paced the room, mind racing. "The celebration gathering so many nobles under our roof, is it wise?" "Perhaps not," Friedrich admitted, "but necessary. Appearances must be maintained while we determine who orchestrated this." Clara had withdrawn to the window, giving them privacy while remaining within call. Edmund noticed how the sunlight illuminated her profile, revealing a dignity at odds with her station. "Why trust her with this?" Edmund asked quietly. "A kitchen girl." Friedrich's expression softened. "Clara risked everything to save me. When all others had given up, she worked through the night preparing remedies, testing them on herself first, to ensure they wouldn't hasten my end." Edmund looked at Clara with new eyes. "She tested poisons on herself?" "Small amounts, to measure reactions." Friedrich coughed lightly. "She burned her hands preparing the final antidote. The scars you've mocked were earned, saving my life." Shame washed over Edmund. He'd ridiculed hands scarred in service to his family. Friedrich continued. "When I regained consciousness, Clara was collapsed beside my bed, exhausted from 3 days without sleep, her hands bandaged with kitchen rags because she'd refused to leave my side for proper treatment." Edmund turned to Clara. Why risk yourself for our family?" "It was right," she answered simply. "I couldn't watch him die when I might help." Friedrich held out a hand which Clara approached to take. "I promised that if I survived, I would ensure her extraordinary mind wouldn't waste away in kitchen drudgery. She deserves education, opportunity." "The medical texts," Edmund realized. "You're training her as my personal physician, though we keep this private to avoid scandal." Edmund's world tilted on its axis. The servant girl he'd dismissed had saved his father when the finest physicians had failed. The hands he'd called dirty had been burned preparing the remedy that preserved his inheritance. "You should have told me," he said finally. "Would you have believed it?" Friedrich asked. "Or would your prejudice have dismissed the truth as impossible?" Edmund had no answer. His father's health had always been his primary concern, yet his pride had blinded him to the very person ensuring it. Friedrich closed his eyes again, fatigue evident. "Clara will remain by my side during my recovery, and beyond. She has earned her place in this household. I expect you to ensure she receives the respect she deserves. Yes, father. Edmund's response came automatically, but his gaze remained fixed on Clara, truly seeing her, perhaps for the first time. Lanterns illuminated the grand drive as carriages delivered guests to Reichenbach Manor. Inside, the ballroom glittered with hundreds of candles reflecting in gilt mirrors. Servants circulated with champagne while musicians played from the gallery above. Baron Friedrich greeted arrivals at the entrance, showing no trace of his recent episode, his formal attire and dignified posture carefully concealing any weakness. Edmund stood nearby, mechanically welcoming guests while his thoughts remained scattered. The revelation about Clara had left him disoriented, forcing a re-evaluation of everything he'd believed about class and worth. Magnificent display, commented Viscount Harrington, appearing at Edmund's side with a champagne glass. Your father appears remarkably robust for someone supposedly at death's door 6 months ago. Edmund studied his friend carefully, newly suspicious of everyone. His recovery has been impressive. Indeed, most unusual. Harrington's smile didn't reach his eyes. I hear we're to be honored with the presence of his miraculous healer tonight. The famous Clara. She should arrive shortly. I'm positively tingling with anticipation. Harrington's tone held mockery. A servant among nobility. How delightfully democratic of your father. Edmund felt an unexpected urge to defend Clara, but suppressed it. My father's gratitude takes unusual forms. Gratitude, Harrington chuckled. Is that what we're calling it? A sudden hush fell over the entrance hall. Edmund turned to see Clara standing hesitantly at the top of the stairs. She wore a simple gown of deep blue silk, modest compared to the elaborate fashions surrounding her, yet elegant in its restraint. Her hair, normally hidden beneath a servant's cap, had been arranged simply with a single pearl clip. The transformation wasn't dramatic. She hadn't become a beauty overnight, but there was an unmistakable dignity in her bearing that commanded attention. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Baron Friedrich approached the stairs and offered his arm. Clara, you honor us. She descended carefully, clearly unused to formal shoes and gowns. The assembled nobility parted before them, faces displaying various degrees of shock and disdain. Extraordinary, Harrington murmured. Your father has truly lost his senses. Edmund didn't respond, watching as his father escorted Clara through the crowd. She maintained remarkable composure despite the whispers and stares, her expression betraying neither pride nor shame, only quiet determination. I must meet this phenomenon, Harrington declared, moving purposefully toward them. Edmund followed, suddenly concerned about leaving Clara to Harrington's cutting wit. He reached them as Harrington made an exaggerated bow. The miraculous Clara, Harrington said, voice carrying deliberately. The servant who conquered death itself. We're all desperately curious how you accomplished what learned physicians could not. Clara looked to Friedrich, who nodded slightly. Knowledge exists in unexpected places. Viscount Harrington, she replied, her voice soft but steady. My mother was skilled with herbs and remedies. A village witch, how charming. Harrington's smile sharpened. And now you've bewitched the Baron into elevating you above your station. Enough, James, Edmund interrupted, surprising himself. Clara is here at my father's invitation. She deserves courtesy. Harrington raised an eyebrow. My apologies. I didn't realize your sympathies had shifted so dramatically. My sympathies remain with those who serve my family loyally, Edmund replied, the words feeling strange yet right on his tongue. Clara saved my father's life at risk to her own. That earns respect regardless of birth. Friedrich's expression showed pleased surprise, while Clara looked at Edmund with cautious gratitude. Harrington backed away with a mocking bow. How commendably enlightened you've become overnight, my friend. As he departed, Friedrich was called away by arriving dignitaries, leaving Edmund and Clara standing awkwardly together. Thank you, she said quietly. Edmund studied her, still reconciling this composed young woman with the servant he'd dismissed for so long. I meant what I said, though I suspect Harrington won't be the last to treat you unkindly tonight. I'm accustomed to unkindness. A hint of wry humor touched her lips, though usually while wearing an apron, not silk. The unexpected glimpse of personality caught Edmund off guard. "The gown suits you better," he found himself saying. Clara smoothed the fabric self-consciously. "It feels foreign, like wearing someone else's skin. You appear perfectly at ease." "Appearances can deceive. Inside, I'm terrified." Her honesty was refreshing amid the artificial politeness surrounding them. Before Edmund could respond, Countess Rothman approached, curiosity overcoming propriety. "Edmund, darling, won't you introduce your father's protege?" More nobles gathered, thinly veiling their scrutiny as Edmund made introductions. Clara answered their probing questions with simple dignity, neither apologizing for her presence nor attempting to disguise her origins. Throughout the exchange, Edmund found himself increasingly impressed by her composure. She belonged nowhere, neither servant nor noble, yet carried herself with a certainty that made others' judgments seem petty. "May I have this done?" Harrington reappeared suddenly, extending his hand to Clara with exaggerated gallantry. Clara hesitated, clearly recognizing the mockery in his invitation. "I'm afraid I don't know the steps, Viscount. I'll guide you," Harrington insisted, his smile predatory. "It would be criminally unfair to deprive us of seeing the Baron's miracle worker attempt a minuet." The surrounding nobles waited expectantly, anticipating entertainment at Clara's expense. Edmund saw the trap. Harrington intended to humiliate her publicly, reinforcing class boundaries she dared cross. Actually, Edmund heard himself say, "Clara has promised this dance to me." The orchestra struck up a stately minuet, the sheet music's elegant notations guiding the musicians through the formal dance. The conductor gestured precisely as violin bows rose and fell in perfect unison, creating the measured rhythm that had accompanied aristocratic gatherings for generations. Harrington's smile faltered as Edmund extended his hand to Clara. "How gallant," he remarked, stepping back with exaggerated courtesy. "Though I wonder if our Clara knows even the basic steps." Edmund guided Clara toward the center of the ballroom, where other couples had begun forming the dance patterns. He felt her trembling slightly. "You don't need to do this," she whispered. "I truly don't know how to dance properly." "Then I'll teach you," Edmund replied, surprising himself with his patience. "Follow my lead and no one will notice any missteps." As they took their positions, Edmund became acutely aware of the attention focused on them. Nobles who had been ignoring the dance floor suddenly found it fascinating. Whispers circulated behind fans and gloved hands. "First position," Edmund instructed quietly. "Right foot forward, slight bow." Clara followed his movements with careful attention, her natural grace compensating somewhat for her lack of training. Edmund guided her through the basic pattern, maintaining a formal distance between them as propriety demanded. "You're doing well," he encouraged when they rejoined after the first figure. "Better than many who've had years of instruction." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Perhaps because I'm actually listening to you." "A novel experience for me," Edmund admitted, guiding her through the next turn. As they continued, Clara's movements became more confident. Though not flawless, her quick intelligence allowed her to anticipate the patterns. What she lacked in formal training, she compensated for with careful observation and adaptation. "I've never understood the purpose of these dances," she said during a moment when they circled each other. "So many rules for simply moving across a floor." "That's precisely the point," Edmund replied. "The rules separate those who belong from those who don't." Clara met his eyes briefly. "And which am I tonight?" The question lingered as they separated for the next figure. Edmund found himself watching her with new awareness. In her borrowed finery, Clara didn't transform into a nobleman's daughter, yet neither did she seem out of place. She occupied some undefined middle ground, moving between worlds with quiet determination. As they rejoined, Edmund continued their conversation. "You surprise me, Clara. Most servants would be overwhelmed by this situation." "I've had practice existing where I don't belong," she replied, though usually with less silk and more soot. Her unexpected humor caught him off guard again. "You're not what I expected. What did you expect?" Edmund considered this as they turned. "Someone simpler, less composed." Disappointingly complex, am I? There was that hint of humor again. Intriguingly so, Edmund admitted. As the dance continued, Baron Friedrich watched from his seat with undisguised satisfaction. Nearby nobles noted his approval with varying degrees of confusion and disapproval. Your father appears pleased with himself, Clara observed during their next pass. Edmund glanced toward Friedrich. He's always had unconventional ideas beneath his traditional exterior, though none quite as dramatic as this. Bringing a servant to a ball, teaching me humility through one. Clara missed a step slightly, recovering quickly. Is that what this is? The dance brought them closer together than the previous figures had required. Edmund could detect the faint scent of herbs that always accompanied Clara, rosemary and something less familiar. I've spent my life believing worth was determined by birth, he said quietly. Then I discover the person who saved my father, my inheritance. Everything I value is someone I wouldn't have glanced at twice. And now? Clara asked, her voice equally soft. Now I'm dancing with her while all of society watches in shock. A wry smile touched his lips, and finding I don't particularly care about their judgment. The music swelled toward its conclusion. Other dancers executed the final flourishes with practiced precision, while Edmund guided Clara through a simplified version. As the last notes faded, he bowed properly while she curtsied with surprising grace. Applause followed, polite, obligatory, yet tinged with lingering disbelief at the spectacle of Edmund von Reichenbach dancing with a servant. As they left the floor, Edmund noticed Harrington watching them with cold calculation, all pretense of amusement gone. Thank you, Clara said as they reached the edge of the ballroom. Though I fear I've only worsened your position with your friends, perhaps it needed worsening. Edmund surprised himself again. Wait here a moment. I'll bring you some refreshment. As he moved toward the champagne, Edmund caught his father's approving nod. For once, the Baron's manipulation didn't irritate him. Whatever lesson Friedrich had intended through Clara's presence was taking root, though perhaps not exactly as planned. When Edmund returned with 2 glasses, he found Clara surrounded by several young noblewomen, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and condescension. He caught fragments of their conversation. Truly extraordinary to receive such an invitation. Must share your secrets for the Baron's miraculous recovery. Wherever did you find that charming little gal? Clara handled their thinly veiled interrogation with calm dignity, neither apologizing for her presence nor attempting to fit in. When she noticed Edmund's return, relief flickered briefly in her eyes. Ladies, Edmund interrupted smoothly, I'm afraid I must steal Clara away. My father has requested her presence. The women dispersed reluctantly, immediately huddling to dissect the strange situation. Edmund handed Clara a glass and guided her toward a quieter corner. They weren't being kind, he observed. No, Clara agreed, but neither were they as cruel as they might have been. Progress of a sort. Edmund studied her over his glass. You're remarkably philosophical about being treated as a curiosity. Would anger serve better? She took a small sip of champagne. I'm a servant at a nobleman's ball. Their reaction is exactly what one would expect. What I don't understand, Edmund said, is how you maintain your composure. I've seen nobles with generations of breeding fall apart under far less scrutiny. The celebration continued well past midnight, though Baron Friedrich had retired earlier, pleading fatigue. Most guests remained, determined to extract maximum value from their journey to Reichenbach Manor. The orchestra played on, though with less precision, as the hour grew late and the wine flowed freely. Edmund excused himself from a tedious conversation with an elderly countess and wandered toward the library. He needed a moment of quiet to gather his thoughts, which had been scattered and contradictory since the dance with Clara. The library door stood slightly ajar, a thin line of candlelight visible in the darkness. Edmund paused, then pushed it open silently. Clara sat at the massive oak table, still in her ball gown, but with her hair partially unpinned. Before her lay an open medical text, her finger tracing diagrams of the human respiratory system. So absorbed was she that she didn't notice Edmund's entrance until he deliberately cleared his throat. She settled, rising quickly. "My lord, I apologize. I should have returned below stairs once the Baron retired. Yet you came here instead." Edmund approached the table, noting several other volumes stacked neatly beside her. "Studying rather than celebrating." "The celebration wasn't mine to enjoy," Clara replied, beginning to gather the books. "Leave them," Edmund said. "I'm curious what captures your attention while others dance and gossip." Hesitantly, Clara reopened the text. "Your father lent me his medical library. This volume discusses treatments for respiratory ailments." Edmund examined the Latin text over her shoulder. "You read Latin as well?" "Enough for medical terminology. Your father has been teaching me." Edmund shook his head in amazement. "When did you sleep these past months?" "Kitchen duties, tending my father, preparing medicines, studying languages. Sleep is a luxury easily sacrificed for knowledge." Clara's finger traced a diagram of lungs. "This explains why certain herbs affect breathing. My mother knew which plants worked, but not always why. Understanding the mechanism makes treatment more precise." Edmund observed her quiet enthusiasm, so different from the fashionable boredom cultivated by his peers. "You truly care about this?" "Of course." She looked surprised at his comment. "Knowledge means the difference between helplessness and agency, between watching someone die and possibly saving them." Her simple conviction made his own pursuits, hunting, gambling, social positioning, seem suddenly hollow. "May I?" Edmund gestured to the chair beside her. Clara nodded, though her surprise was evident. They sat in silence for a moment before Edmund noticed a leather-bound journal half hidden beneath the medical texts. The Baron's personal journal, recognizable by its distinctive embossed cover. "My father allows you to read his private writings." Clara carefully moved the journal aside. "Only the medical observations. He's documented his symptoms and responses to treatments meticulously." Edmund reached for the journal but stopped himself. His father's private thoughts remained off-limits, even to him. Yet he'd given Clara access, another boundary crossed. "Did you always wish to study medicine?" he asked instead. "I never imagined it possible," Clara admitted. "In my village, girls like me became wives or servants, occasionally both. Yet here you are, reading Latin medical texts in a nobleman's library." A small smile touched her lips. "Life takes unexpected turns." Indeed. Edmund leaned back, studying her in the candlelight. Without the tension of their earlier confrontations, he could appreciate the quiet intelligence in her features. "You know, you've never actually explained how you recognized the poison that nearly killed my father." Clara's expression grew somber. "When I was 12, a neighboring village experienced a similar incident. Several people fell ill with identical symptoms after a visiting nobleman's feast. My mother was called to help but arrived too late for most. What happened? Belladonna mixed with another substance I couldn't identify, deliberately administered." Clara's fingers raised the edge of the book absently. "I watched them die, lungs filling with fluid, skin turning blue. I memorized every symptom, determined to recognize it if I ever encountered it again. And you did, here." She nodded. "When I saw your father struggling to breathe, the blue tinge to his lips, I knew immediately. Yet you said nothing to the physician or authorities. Would they have believed a kitchen maid, or would they have accused me of causing what I recognized?" Her practical assessment wasn't bitter, merely realistic. "I chose to act instead of explain." The candlelight flickered, casting shadows across her face. Edmund realized how little he truly knew about her life before Reichenbach. "You said your mother was an herbalist. What happened to her?" "Fever took her when I was 15, Clara replied quietly. "Ironic that she could heal others, but not herself." "And your father? Never knew him." "My mother said he was a scholar who passed through our village, stayed a season, then continued his travels. He left her with child, but also with books and knowledge she might never have encountered otherwise. Edmund absorbed this. So you came to Reichenbach after her death? Clara nodded. 3 years ago, with nothing but her wooden pendant and whatever knowledge I had managed to absorb. The personal details humanized her in a way their previous interactions hadn't. Edmund found himself wondering how differently things might have unfolded had he bothered to learn her story earlier. "Why did you mock my hands?" Clara asked suddenly, the question clearly one she'd held back for some time. Of all things to notice about a servant, why focus such contempt there? Edmund hadn't expected such directness. After a moment's consideration, he answered honest, "They represented everything I was taught to disdain. Physical labor, common blood, the necessity of working to survive. My hands have never known real work. It was a point of pride." And now, Edmund examined his own smooth palms, unmarked by labor or sacrifice. "Now I wonder what they've truly accomplished." Morning light found Baron Friedrich confined to bed, his breathing labored despite Clara's ministrations. Edmund stood at the bedside, watching her prepare yet another remedy. The celebration overtaxed him, she explained quietly, measuring drops from a small amber vial. The liquid caught the light, a viscous, greenish substance that gave off a bitter aroma. "This will ease the constriction in his lungs." Friedrich motioned Edmund closer. "We must speak privately. Father, you need rest. What I need is clarity between us." Friedrich's voice, though weakened, maintained its authoritative edge. "Clara, leave us for a moment, but remain nearby." She nodded and departed, closing the door softly behind her. Friedrich pushed himself straighter against the pillows. The poisoning was not a random act. It was deliberate and carefully planned. "So Clara mentioned," Edmund replied, pulling a chair closer. "But who? I have enemies." Men. Friedrich's hand trembled slightly as he reached for a glass of water. "Land disputes with neighboring estates. Political adversaries in Vienna. Even within our own family. Cousin Augustus, possibly. The evidence remains inconclusive." Friedrich's gaze fixed on a point beyond Edmund. "I've kept certain details from you, not from distrust, but for protection. I'm not a child needing shelter. No, you're my heir, which makes you the next logical target." Friedrich's expression grew grim. "If I had died, everything would have passed to you. Then, perhaps, another unfortunate accident would befall the new Baron von Reichenbach." Edmund absorbed this chilling logic. "You believe I remain in danger. I know it." Friedrich reached beneath his pillow and withdrew a small object wrapped in silk. "This was found in my wine 6 months ago, after I began showing symptoms." Edmund unwrapped the silk to reveal a tiny glass vial, no larger than his smallest fingertip. A trace of residue coated its interior. "The poison carrier," Friedrich explained, "designed to dissolve slowly once submerged, releasing its contents gradually to mimic natural illness rather than sudden poisoning." "Clever," Edmund murmured, "and nearly successful. It would have been entirely successful without Clara." Friedrich's voice softened. "I need you to understand what truly happened, Edmund, not the sanitized version we've presented to the world." Friedrich's gaze drifted to the window, remembrance clouding his features. "I was declining rapidly. The physician had withdrawn, offering only palliative measures for my mysterious ailment. Servants began preparing for mourning. Even I had accepted my imminent death." He paused, gathering strength. "Clara had been at Reichenbach only 2 months, working in the kitchen. She delivered my meals and noticed the progression of symptoms. One evening when I could barely breathe, she entered without permission and directly questioned me about what I had consumed over previous weeks." Edmund listened intently, piecing together the fragmented story he'd heard from others. "Her directness shocked me into answering," Friedrich continued. "When I mentioned a peculiar bitterness in my evening wine, she examined the decanter immediately. That's when she found this vial, caught in the crystal facets at the bottom." Friedrich's hand gripped Edmund's suddenly, with surprising strength. She recognized the method immediately, having seen it used in her village years before. While others planned my funeral, Clara worked through the night preparing an antidote, testing substances, risking herself. How did she test them? Edmund asked, recalling the scars on her hands. On her own skin first, watching for reactions, then tiny tastes when necessary. Friedrich shook his head in remembered amazement. She created 3 different remedies before finding one that reduced my symptoms. For 3 days, she barely left my side, administering doses hourly while continuing to refine the treatment. And no one noticed? Question. The household assumed she'd been assigned to basic nursing duties. By then, most had abandoned hope. A faint smile touched Friedrich's lips. When I began to improve, the physician claimed credit. I allowed it publicly, while knowing the truth. Edmund turned the empty vial in his fingers, the instrument of planned murder, so innocuous in appearance. And you've kept this secret all these months. Kept Clara's role hidden, to protect her as much as the investigation. If someone succeeded in killing me, what would they do to the servant girl who thwarted them? Friedrich coughed, the effort of extended conversation taking its toll. Clara saved not just my life, Edmund, but potentially yours as well. Remember that when you look at her dirty hands. Shame colored Edmund's face at the reminder of his cruelty. I made her a promise during those dark nights, Friedrich continued, his voice fading, that if I survived, I would ensure her extraordinary mind and courage were recognized, that she would have opportunities worthy of her gifts. The medical education, Edmund realized, the special treatment, the minimum of what she deserves. Friedrich's eyes closed briefly in exhaustion. I won't live forever, Edmund. My lungs are permanently damaged. When I'm gone, Clara will have only my written endorsements to protect her position, unless she has mine as well, Edmund said quietly. Friedrich's eyes opened, studying his son with newfound respect. Yes, unless she has yours. A soft knock interrupted them. Clara entered with a fresh remedy, her expression carefully neutral though her eyes quickly assessed Friedrich's condition. Enough talk, she said firmly, helping Friedrich sit up. This will reduce the inflammation. As she administered the medicine with practiced ease, Edmund watched her hands, those hands he'd mocked so casually, and saw them now for what they truly were, instruments of healing, scarred by sacrifice. The Baron drifted into uneasy sleep, his breathing shallow but stable. Clara adjusted his pillows gently before gathering her supplies. Edmund remained by the window, silently watching her methodical movements. "Will he recover?" he asked when she had finished. "From this episode, yes." Clara corked a bottle of tincture, but each attack weakens him further. The poison damaged his lungs permanently. Edmund moved closer. "Show me your hands." Clara looked up, startled by the request. After a moment's hesitation, she extended her hands, palms up. Edmund took them carefully, examining them in the morning light. What he had dismissed as common work-roughened skin revealed itself as something entirely different. Irregular patches of shiny tissue crossed her palms, burned scars, some still pink with relative newness. Alongside these were older marks, small, precise scars that could only have come from deliberate cuts. "How did this happen?" he asked, though he had already guessed. The antidote required heating certain compounds to precise temperatures. Clara's voice remained clinical, detached. "The pot shattered during the final preparation. I couldn't stop to treat the burns while your father was dying." Edmund traced a finger gently over one particularly severe scar that ran across her right palm. "And these older marks?" "Testing for reactions. Different substances affect skin differently. Burning, blistering, numbing. Each reaction provides information about properties and potency." "You tested poisons on yourself," Edmund's voice held disbelief. "Controlled amounts, on limited areas." She spoke as if describing weather patterns rather than self-inflicted wounds. Edmund released her hands reluctantly. "These are the hands I mocked for being dirty." "They often were dirty," Clara replied, with unexpected lightness. "Kitchen work, gardening, mixing herbs, cleanliness was sacrificed for necessity." "Why didn't you tell me? When I insulted you, why not explain?" Clara gathered her medical box. Would you have believed a kitchen maid claiming to have saved your father through secret remedies? Or would you have had me dismissed as delusional? Her practical assessment silenced him. Of course he wouldn't have believed her. He would have interpreted any such claim as manipulation or madness. Besides, she continued, your father requested discretion. The investigation into the poisoning required it. Edmund followed her to the door. Wait, I need to understand everything. No more half-truths or omissions. Clara glanced at the sleeping Baron, then nodded. The small reading room. 10 minutes. Edmund arrived first, pacing the intimate space lined with bookcases. Unlike the formal library, this room served practical purposes, rather than displaying wealth through leather-bound collections. Clara entered quietly, having changed from her ball gown into a simple dress. Not servant's clothing, but not gentry attire either. The Baron had evidently provided her with appropriate clothing for her unusual position. Tell me everything, Edmund said without preamble. From the beginning, Clara sat, folding her scarred hands in her lap. I was transferred to kitchen duties 6 months ago. My primary responsibility was preparing the Baron's evening meals. I noticed his declining health almost immediately, slight tremors first, then progressive weakness, shortness of breath, and you recognize these as poison symptoms. Not initially, they mimicked natural illness. But the progression was too rapid, too specific. She leaned forward, intensity breaking through her usual reserve. When his lips began showing blue discoloration while his skin flushed red, I recognized the pattern. I'd seen it before. In your village, she nodded. A visiting nobleman fell ill at a feast. Then his host and several guests showed identical symptoms. My mother was called to help, but most died within days. You never determined the poisoner. The incident was attributed to spoiled food. Clara's expression suggested she believed otherwise, but my mother preserved samples of everything served. She identified belladonna combined with another substance, something that accelerated its effects while delaying onset of symptoms. Edmund listened, impressed by her methodical recounting. And you saw the same in my father? Yes. When the physician declared him beyond help, I examined his personal items. The wine decanter contained traces of the same compounds, and the small vial your father showed you. So you created an antidote. I attempted several. The first 2 failed. Her voice remained steady, but Edmund noticed her fingers unconsciously tracing the scars on her opposite hand. The third showed promise. Your father regained consciousness briefly. I refined it further based on his responses, testing each on yourself first. Clara nodded. I couldn't risk administering something that might accelerate the damage. Edmund struggled to comprehend such dedication. You risked your life for a nobleman who had never shown you particular kindness. Why? Because I could help. Her simple answer held no dramatic nobility, just practical certainty. I had knowledge others didn't. Using it was the only reasonable choice. Most would consider self-preservation reasonable, perhaps. A small smile touched her lip, but I wouldn't have preserved much self if I'd watched someone die knowing I might have saved them. The statement, delivered without drama or self-aggrandizement, struck Edmund with unexpected force. He had been raised to value family honor, noble obligation, and personal accomplishment. Clara's moral compass pointed to something both simpler and more profound, the inherent value of alleviating suffering regardless of station. The night the poison nearly took him, Clara continued, your father made me promise to accept his patronage if he survived. He insisted my knowledge shouldn't be wasted in kitchen work. Hence the medical books, the training, yes, though we agreed to maintain appearances to avoid disrupting household order. Until recently, until the celebration Edmund finished, where he publicly acknowledged your role. Clara nodded. He believes his time grows short. He wants my position secure. Before, she didn't complete the sentence. Before I inherit, Edmund said quietly, understanding dawning. He fears I would dismiss you without his protection. Clara met his eyes directly. would you have? Before knowing everything? Edmund considered the question honestly. Yes, he admitted finally. I would have returned you to your proper place without a second thought. And now? Her question held no challenge, only genuine inquiry. Edmund studied her. This extraordinary, ordinary woman, whose scarred hands had saved his father when all others had failed, whose quiet dignity had withstood his contempt, whose intelligence flourished despite circumstances designed to suppress it. Now, he said slowly, I begin to understand what my father saw when he looked past your station to your worth. 2 days passed with the Baron confined to bed, his recovery slow but steady. The celebration guests had departed, leaving the manor quieter but still buzzing with whispered speculation about Clara's unprecedented appearance at the ball. Edmund had kept his distance, absorbed in thought and an internal struggle that left him restless and irritable. On the third morning, he found himself standing outside the small room that had been converted to Clara's workroom. He'd never visited this space, tucked away in the east wing near his father's chambers. He hesitated, then knocked firmly. Clara opened the door, surprise registering briefly before her features composed into their usual calm. She wore a simple dress with an apron covering the front, sleeves rolled to the elbows. The room behind her contained a workbench covered with mortars, vials, and bundles of dried herbs. Lord Edmund, she stepped back, opening the door wider. Has the Baron's condition changed? No. He sleeps comfortably. Edmund entered, looking around with undisguised curiosity. So this is where you work your miracles. Just remedies, Clara corrected, returning to the workbench. Nothing miraculous about understanding plants and their properties. Edmund picked up a small brass mortar, turning it in his hands. His family signet ring caught the light, gold with the von Reichenbach eagle prominently displayed. The contrast between the ring and Clara's scarred hands as she worked nearby wasn't lost on him. I've been unfair to you, he said finally, setting down the mortar. Cruel, actually. Clara continued measuring dried leaves onto a small scale. You treated me as nobility typically treats servants. I never expected otherwise. That doesn't make it right. Edmund found her lack of resentment almost more difficult than anger would have been. I mocked your hands, the very hands that saved my father. Yes, you did. Clara looked up, her directness surprising him. Did you come seeking absolution, my lord? The question caught him off guard. I came to apologize. Why? She set down her work, giving him her full attention. Because you've discovered my actions benefited your family. Would you apologize to a servant who hadn't saved something valuable to you? Edmund flushed. Her assessment cut uncomfortably close to truth. His remorse was genuine but undeniably connected to her service to his family. I don't know, he admitted. I've never considered it before. Clara nodded, accepting his honesty without judgment. At least you don't lie to yourself. I want to understand, Edmund said suddenly, about you, your life before Reichenbach, how you learned what you know. Clara studied him as if assessing his sincerity. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she gestured to a chair. What would you like to know? Edmund sat, removing his signet ring and placing it on the workbench, a small, unconscious gesture of equality. Everything you're willing to share. For the next hour, Clara spoke of her childhood in a small village, her mother's work as a healer, and the knowledge passed down through generations of women. She described learning to read at the village church, borrowing books from the priest, and later studying her mother's carefully preserved notes on medicinal preparations. Edmund listened without interruption, genuinely absorbed. He'd never before considered the lives of those who served his family. Their histories, ambitions, and knowledge had seemed irrelevant to his world. When my mother died, Clara continued, measuring ingredients for a tincture. As she spoke, I had few options. Servitude was the most respectable for a woman alone. You could have set up as a healer yourself, without protection. Clara shook her head. Women practicing medicine independently risk accusations of witchcraft, or worse. A servant in a great house has some security at least. Her pragmatism impressed Edmund. No self-pity colored her account, only realistic assessment of limited options. "And now," he asked, "my father offers you education, but what future do you envision for yourself?" Clara considered the question carefully. Knowledge is its own purpose. Beyond that, she hesitated. "I haven't permitted myself to envision futures that seemed impossible. But if you could choose any path, to heal, to continue learning," a rare smile briefly illuminated her features, "to have a small room with books and the freedom to study without fear." Such modest ambitions for someone with her abilities. Edmund felt a twinge of shame at his own entitled expectations of life. "The world is unjustly arranged," he observed. "Yes," Clara agreed simply. "It is." Edmund watched her work for several minutes, her movements precise and confident. "I truly am sorry," he said finally. "Not just for mocking your hands, but for never seeing you at all, for assuming your worth was determined by your station." Clara looked up, studying him with those perceptive eyes. "That's a better apology, Lord Edmund." "Just Edmund," he corrected impulsively. "At least when we're speaking privately like this." She raised an eyebrow. "That would be inappropriate. So is a servant attending a ball as a guest. So is a nobleman apologizing to a kitchen maid." Edmund smiled slightly. "We seem to have moved beyond strict propriety already." Clara considered this, then nodded. "Very well, Edmund." She tested the name carefully, as if sampling an unfamiliar herb. Apology accepted. They fell into surprisingly comfortable conversation as Clara continued her work. Edmund asking about the properties of various herbs, and Clara explaining their applications. He found himself genuinely interested, not merely performing politeness. When a servant knocked to summon Clara to the Baron's chambers, Edmund realized they had talked for nearly 2 hours. As she gathered her remedies, he retrieved his signet ring from the workbench where it had sat forgotten. "May I visit again?" he asked. "To learn more about your work." Clara paused at the door, that same assessing look in her eyes. "If you wish, though people will talk." "Let them," Edmund replied, surprising himself with how little he suddenly cared about servants' gossip. "I find I have much to learn, and you seem an excellent teacher." A week after the celebration, Baron Friedrich had recovered enough to resume limited duties in his study. Edmund entered one morning to find his father reviewing correspondence. Color returned to his face, though the shadows beneath his eyes remained. "You look better," Edmund observed, taking the chair opposite the desk. "Clara's remedies work wonders." Friedrich set aside a letter. "Though I'll never regain full strength." Edmund noticed a folded paper on the desk, different from the others. Heavier parchment, unmarked by any seal or insignia. Friedrich followed his gaze. "This arrived yesterday, hand-delivered to a stable boy rather than through proper channels." He pushed the paper toward Edmund, who unfolded it carefully. The message consisted of a single line in careful block letters. "What sickness failed to accomplish, accident shall complete." "A threat," Edmund said, the paper suddenly feeling tainted in his hands. "Anonymous." "Yes." Friedrich's expression remained calm, though tension showed in his shoulders. "Not unexpected. Whoever attempted to poison me realizes their failure and grows impatient. We should alert the authorities and tell them what? That someone wishes harm to a nobleman. Hardly unusual." Friedrich shook his head. "Besides, we still don't know who orchestrated the poisoning. Until we identify our enemy, we must proceed cautiously." Edmund reread the threatening note. "This arrived yesterday. Has Clara seen it?" "Yes. She's increased the guard on my food and drink." A knock interrupted them. Clara entered, carrying a tray with tea and a small plate of biscuits. Her expression as she placed it on the desk betrayed no concern, though Edmund noted she poured the Baron's tea herself, rather than leaving the pot. "Your morning tea, Baron," she said, "and the tincture for your lungs." Friedrich nodded. "Thank you, Clara. Join us, please." She settled into a chair near the window, not quite an equal at the desk, but no longer standing as a servant would. Edmund had grown accustomed to her unusual position in recent days. "We were discussing the note," Friedrich said, lifting his cup. Clara's eyes darted briefly to Edmund. The threat should be taken seriously. The handwriting suggests an educated person disguising their normal script. You've examined it closely, Edmund noted. Of course, she spoke matter-of-factly. Knowing one's enemy provides advantage. We have some suspects, Friedrich said. Neighboring landowners who would benefit from my death, political rivals, distant relatives with inheritance claims, and Viscount Harrington, Clara added quietly. Edmund straightened. James? That's absurd. He's a friend, who arrived early for the celebration and took particular interest in my role here, Clara pointed out, who asked numerous questions about the Baron's illness and recovery. Natural curiosity, Edmund protested, though doubt crept into his voice. Friedrich watched their exchange with interest. Clara has raised similar concerns. Harrington's family has coveted our eastern forests for generations. With me gone and you indisposed, those lands might become available. The implication chilled Edmund. You think James capable of murder? I think anyone is capable given sufficient motivation, Friedrich replied. Clara, what changes have you noticed since the celebration? She set down her teacup. The Baron's recovery suffered a setback, precisely when he seemed most improved. His favorite horse went lame, inexplicably. A shelf in the library nearly collapsed when he was alone reading beneath it. Edmund frowned. These could be coincidences. Perhaps one, not all. Clara leaned forward. Something else concerns me. Yesterday I found evidence that someone had searched my workroom. Nothing was taken, but items were slightly rearranged. Looking for what? Edmund asked. My notes on the poison and antidote, possibly. Clara exchanged a glance with Friedrich. Or ensuring I haven't documented evidence identifying the poisoner. Friedrich nodded grimly. We've kept detailed records, locked in my private safe. Edmund absorbed this, his world shifting again. The household he'd taken for granted harbored unknown dangers, while the social circle he'd trusted potentially contained would-be murderers. What do we do? He asked, finally. We proceed with caution, Friedrich replied, while appearing to suspect nothing. Clara continues to monitor my health and food. You observe your friend Harrington and others who might wish us harm. And I continue researching the original poison, Clara added. The more I understand about it, the better prepared we'll be if it's attempted again. Friedrich's expression softened as he looked at her. You've taken considerable risk already, Clara. Perhaps I'm already involved, she interrupted gently. My safety is tied to yours now. Edmund studied her, noting the quiet determination in her bearing. No longer the silent servant, she'd become an essential ally. Her transformation in his eyes continued to humble him. If danger returns, Edmund said, we face it together. Clara met his gaze, surprise and something warmer flickering briefly in her eyes. Together, she agreed. After they departed, Edmund lingered in the corridor, mind churning. The threatening note lay heavy in his thoughts, but heavier still was the realization of how quickly priorities could shift. 2 weeks ago, his concern centered on social standing and aristocratic pursuits. Now, protecting his father, and by extension, Clara consumed his thoughts. Later that afternoon, a messenger arrived with an unexpected announcement. Viscount James Harrington had returned to Reichenbach Manor, requesting accommodation for several days. Edmund watched from the library window as Harrington dismounted in the courtyard, his smile as charming as ever. Friend or foe? The question hung uncomfortably in Edmund's mind as he went to greet his once trusted companion. Harrington's return cast a shadow over Reichenbach Manor. Though Edmund maintained outward cordiality, inwardly he scrutinized every word and gesture from his erstwhile friend. They dined together, rode together, engaged in the same aristocratic pastimes they had always shared, yet an invisible wall had formed. Edmund's newfound suspicion creating distance where easy camaraderie once existed. Your father seems remarkably improved, Harrington commented one evening as they played chess in the library. Quite the recovery for a man so recently at death's door. Edmund moved his knight carefully. Yes, we're fortunate. And your little medicine woman, Harrington captured a pawn, still mixing potions and catching your father's eye. Clara continues her duties. Edmund kept his tone neutral despite the mocking undertone in Harrington's question. Curious arrangement. Harrington studied the board. The servant girl suddenly elevated to the position of trusted healer. One might wonder what other services she provides. Edmund's hand tightened on his chess piece. You mistake my father's character. Perhaps. Harrington smiled. Or perhaps I simply recognize men's nature more honestly than you. Later that night, Edmund found Clara in the Baron's study, organizing papers while Friedrich slept in his adjoining bedchamber. Her face showed strain, the vigilance of recent days taking its toll. You should rest, Edmund said quietly. Soon, she continued sorting documents. The Baron asked me to organize his research on neighboring estates. Land disputes, boundary conflicts, resource claims, possible motives for the poisoning. Edmund moved closer, examining the papers spread across the desk. Maps and legal documents chronicled generations of aristocratic squabbling over forests, water rights and mineral deposits. Anything pointing to Harrington? He asked. His family appears in several disputes. Clara replied, indicating a particular map. This western forest has been contested for 3 generations. Recently, deposits of copper were discovered there, increasing its value considerably. Edmund studied the map. Still, it seems insufficient motive for murder. Wealth and power rarely require additional motivation, Clara observed. As she reached for another document, her sleeve caught a candle holder. It toppled, rolling toward the edge of the desk. Edmund caught it before it fell, his hand brushing against the oak paneling beneath. A barely perceptible click sounded, followed by a section of paneling sliding slightly inward. What was that? Clara asked, setting down her papers. Edmund pressed the panel experimentally. It moved again, revealing a narrow gap, a hidden compartment. Together they pulled the panel fully open, exposing a small space behind. Within lay a leather-bound ledger and what appeared to be architectural drawings of Reichenbach Manor. Clara carefully removed the documents while Edmund held the candle closer. The drawings showed detailed plans of the house, including notations about servant passages, structural supports, and most concerning, a complex network of hidden passages between walls. I had no idea these existed, Edmund murmured, tracing a passage that connected the wine cellar to his father's chambers. The manor was renovated before my birth, but these passages don't appear in any official plans. Clara opened the ledger, scanning entries dating back decades. This documents the construction of these passages. Commissioned by your grandfather, apparently. For what purpose? Surveillance, perhaps? Or escape routes in troubled times? She turned another page. They've been forgotten over time, it seems. Your father makes no mention of using them. Edmund studied the plans more carefully. This explains how the poisoner might have accessed father's chambers undetected, and how someone searched your workroom without being seen. Clara nodded, her expression grave. If someone rediscovered these passages, they could move throughout the house invisibly. Edmund finished. We need to find the entry points, seal them if possible. Not all, Clara cautioned. If we alert the culprit that we've discovered their method, we lose our advantage. Better to watch and wait. Edmund considered this strategic thinking with new respect. Where would you begin? Clara examined the plans carefully. Here. She pointed to a passage connecting the library to the servants' staircase. It's centrally located, but seldom occupied at night. We could monitor it without arousing suspicion. A floorboard creaked in the corridor outside. They froze, exchanging glances. Edmund moved silently to the door, opening it swiftly. The hallway stood empty, but a shadow disappeared around the distant corner too quickly to identify. Someone was listening, Clara whispered, gathering the documents hurriedly. Harrington? Or a servant reporting to him? She replaced the papers in the hidden compartment and carefully closed the panel. We must be more cautious. Edmund nodded, extinguishing candles to suggest they had finished their work. Tomorrow night, we'll investigate the passage you identified. Until then, we should maintain our usual routines." As they prepared to leave separately to avoid arousing further suspicion, Edmund touched Clara's arm. "Be careful. If Harrington is indeed behind this, he may see you as the primary obstacle to his plans. And you as well," Clara reminded him. "If your father dies, you inherit and become the next target." The shared danger created an unexpected bond between them, heir and servant, united against a common threat. Edmund realized with surprise how completely his priorities had shifted in recent weeks. Clara's safety now concerned him as much as his father's, though for different reasons he wasn't yet prepared to examine. "We'll protect each other," he said simply. Clara nodded, her usually composed features showing a moment of vulnerability. "Until tomorrow night, then." She slipped away through the servant's door, leaving Edmund to contemplate how thoroughly his world had transformed from one of entitled certainty to deadly conspiracy, with a kitchen maid turned ally at its center. The library stood silent at midnight, moonlight casting long shadows through tall windows. Edmund waited behind a heavy curtain, watching Clara examine the oak paneling indicated in the hidden plans. Her fingers moved methodically, pressing subtle indentations until a soft click rewarded her persistence. "Found it," she whispered, as a section of bookshelves swung inward, revealing a narrow passage. Edmund joined her, peering into the darkness. Impressive craftsmanship. One would never suspect its existence. "Such secrets seem commonplace in noble houses," Clara observed, holding her lantern higher. "Shall we?" They entered cautiously, Edmund leading while Clara followed with the lantern. The passage narrowed immediately, forcing them to proceed single file. Dust indicated infrequent use, but clear footprints showed recent activity. "Someone has definitely been using these," Edmund murmured, pointing to the tracks. They followed the winding passage, passing hidden observation points that allowed views into various rooms. One looked directly into the Baron's study, another into Clara's workroom. "This explains how they've monitored us," Clara said. "Every conversation we believed private potentially overheard." The passage branched several times. Following the freshest footprints, they descended a narrow staircase that led deep beneath the manor. The air grew cooler, damper. "I believe we're approaching the wine cellar," Edmund whispered. A faint light glowed ahead. They extinguished their lantern and crept forward silently. The passage opened into a small alcove within the cellar itself, concealed behind wine racks. Through the gaps between bottles, they could see a figure working at a rough wooden table. Viscount Harrington stood mixing substances in glass vials, consulting a small notebook as he worked. Before him sat Clara's medicine box, the one she kept locked in her workroom, its contents spread across the table. "He's stolen my remedies," Clara breathed, barely audible. Edmund watched as Harrington carefully measured a dark liquid into the Baron's personal wine bottle, distinguished by its unique crystal pattern. The significance was unmistakable. "We need to stop him," Edmund whispered. "Now, before he returns that poisoned wine to my father's chambers." Clara caught his arm. "Wait. We need proof that will convince others. Nobility will never accept a servant's word against a viscount's." Edmund nodded reluctantly, seeing the truth in her caution. They watched as Harrington completed his work, carefully wiping the bottle's exterior to remove any evidence of tampering. He repacked Clara's medicine box, apparently intending to replace it. As he turned toward the hidden passage, Edmund and Clara retreated hastily. At a branching point, Clara pulled Edmund down a different path. "This should lead to my workroom," she whispered. "We can intercept him there." They emerged behind a cabinet in Clara's small domain, just as Harrington entered through the main door, carrying the stolen medicine box. He moved with confident familiarity, clearly having explored the room before. As he replaced the box on its shelf, Clara stepped from hiding. "Looking for something, Viscount Harrington?" He spun around, shock quickly masked by aristocratic composure. The miraculous, Clara. Working late, I see. As are you." She moved toward her medicine box. though I don't recall giving you permission to borrow my supplies. Harrington's smile tightened. I was merely curious about your methods. Professional indeed. Edmund emerged from the hidden passage, blocking the main exit. We saw you in the wine cellar, preparing another dose for my father. Harrington's hand moved to his coat pocket. Edmund, I'd hoped to spare you involvement. By murdering my father, by planning the same for me afterward. Edmund stepped closer. Why, James? For land? Money? For necessity? Harrington's charm vanished, replaced by cold determination. Your father blocks progress at every turn. His outdated policies and sentimental approach to governance weaken the entire province, so you appointed yourself his executioner. Edmund's voice hardened, and chose poison, a coward's weapon. Harrington withdrew a small pistol from his pocket. There's nothing cowardly about decisive action. The old order must give way to the new. Your father refuses to see it. You might have been persuaded in time. You'll hang for this, Edmund said quietly. I think not. Harrington gestured with the pistol. Unfortunately, you and your father's pet herbalist discovered an intruder in the night. In the confusion, tragedy ensued. By morning, I'll be the concerned friend who discovered the bodies. Clara had been inching toward her workbench. As Harrington's attention fixed on Edmund, she grabbed a small vial and flung its contents toward the Viscount's face. He fired reflexively, the bullet embedding in the wall as he stumbled back, coughing and disoriented. Edmund tackled him, wrestling for the weapon. They crashed against shelves, sending bottles and herbs cascading around them. Harrington fought with desperate strength, landing several solid blows before Edmund managed to pin his gun arm. Clara rushed forward with another vial. Hold him still. Edmund forced Harrington's head back as Clara poured the liquid into his mouth. The Viscount choked, struggling violently, before gradually growing limp. What was that? Edmund asked, breathing heavily, as he retrieved the pistol. A sleeping compound. He'll be unconscious for hours. Clara was already moving to her cabinet, withdrawing a small bottle. This is the antidote for the poison he prepared. We must reach your father immediately. Edmund secured Harrington with curtain cords, while Clara gathered evidence: the poisoned wine bottle, Harrington's notebook with incriminating formulas, the stolen vial of poison. You saved my life, Edmund said, touching a cut on his temple from the struggle. Again, Clara's hands paused in their work. We saved each other, she corrected gently, as I believe we were meant to do. Their eyes met in a moment of perfect understanding before duty reasserted itself. There remained a poisoned wine bottle to replace, a baron to protect, and authorities to summon. Edmund took one last look at the unconscious Harrington. I trusted him completely. The closest people often pose the greatest danger, Clara observed, holding up her antidote, and sometimes help comes from where we least expect it. Edmund nodded, acknowledging the truth that had transformed his worldview, that worth and character transcended the artificial boundaries of class and station, a lesson embodied in the remarkable woman standing before him, her scarred hands holding the salvation of his family once again. Spring blossomed into summer at Reichenbach Manor. The gardens flourished under warm sunshine, roses climbing trellises in vibrant displays of color. 6 weeks had passed since Viscount Harrington's arrest and removal to Vienna for trial. The scandal had rippled through provincial nobility, whispered conversations and speculative glances following the von Reichenbach family at social gatherings. In the Baron's study, Friedrich sat reviewing correspondence, his health improved though permanently weakened by the poisoning attempts. Edmund entered, carrying fresh documents requiring signature. The Eastern Forest expansion proceeds well, Edmund reported. The new irrigation system benefits both our lands and the surrounding farms. Friedrich nodded approvingly. You've managed these projects admirably. I confess I had doubts about your readiness for such responsibility. As did I, Edmund admitted. Priorities change when confronted with what truly matters. Their conversation paused as a knock sounded. Clara entered carrying a tray with the Baron's afternoon medicine. In the weeks since Harrington's arrest, her position at Reichenbach had evolved further. No longer treated as a servant by anyone in the household, she now moved with quiet confidence in her role as the Baron's personal physician, and increasingly, as Edmund's trusted advisor. "Perfect timing," Friedrich said warmly. "We've just received correspondence from the physician in Vienna. He wishes to consult with you regarding my ongoing treatment." Clara set down the tray. "A physician consulting with a woman. How progressive." "Your reputation grows," Edmund commented. "3 neighboring estates have requested your expertise for ailments their own physicians couldn't remedy." "I've agreed to visit only one," Clara replied, measuring the Baron's medicine. "My primary responsibility remains here." Friedrich exchanged a meaningful glance with his son. "Edmund, perhaps you might show Clara our latest addition to the library." The medical texts from Leipzig arrived this morning. Edmund nodded, understanding his father's intent for a private conversation. "If you have time after tending to my father." Clara recognized the polite fiction but played along. "I would be honored." Later they walked together through the western gardens, Clara examining herbs in the medicinal section she had designed and planted. Edmund watched her work, still marveling at how completely his perception of her had transformed in recent months. "My father wishes to commission a new portrait," he said finally, "of all 3 of us." Clara looked up, genuine surprise crossing her features. "That would cause quite a stir among the nobility. A servant in the family portrait? You haven't been a servant since you saved my father's life," Edmund replied, though it took me far too long to recognize that fact. She straightened, brushing soil from her hands he once mocked, but now admired for their skill and courage. "What am I then?" "Not nobility, certainly." "Does it require a title?" "You're Clara, healer of Reichenbach, my father's physician, and," he hesitated, "my dearest friend." A smile touched her lips. "Friend? Is that the word?" Edmund felt uncharacteristic uncertainty. Their relationship had evolved beyond conventional definitions, neither servant and master nor strictly equals, yet bound by experiences that transcended social boundaries. "Perhaps friend is insufficient," he admitted, "though companion seems equally inadequate." Clara's expression softened. "In my village people spoke plainly about such matters." "Then let us speak plainly." Edmund took her hands, soil and all. "These past months have changed me fundamentally, Clara. You've changed me. I see the world and you differently now." "And how do you see me?" she asked quietly. "As the most remarkable person I've ever known. Brave, brilliant, kind, despite having little reason for kindness." His thumbs traced the scars on her palms. "I find myself wanting to build something new with you, something that defies traditional boundaries and expectations." Clara studied him carefully. "The world won't easily accept such defiance." "The world will adapt," Edmund replied with newfound certainty. "As I have." They continued walking, hands still joined, discussing possibilities that would have seemed unimaginable months earlier. Clara would expand her medical practice while maintaining her position at Reichenbach. Edmund would gradually assume more of his father's responsibilities, implementing reforms that benefited both the estate and surrounding communities. From his study window, Baron Friedrich observed them crossing the garden. Despite his weakened health, satisfaction brightened his features. The poisoning attempt, though nearly fatal, had catalyzed his son's transformation from entitled nobleman to thoughtful leader. More importantly, it had brought Clara's exceptional abilities to light abilities that might otherwise have remained buried in kitchen work and obscurity. The following week, a renowned portrait artist arrived from Vienna. In the manor's grand hall, Friedrich sat in his ceremonial chair, Edmund standing beside him in formal attire. Clara joined them wearing a simple but elegant blue gown, the same color she had worn to the celebration that marked the beginning of so much change. "Are you certain about this, Baron?" she asked quietly as the artist arranged them. "It will cause considerable comment." Friedrich smiled, paternal pride evident as he glanced between Clara and his son. "Let them comment. Reichenbach recognizes true value, regardless of its origin. As the artist began his preliminary sketches, Edmund reached subtly for Clara's hand. Her scarred fingers intertwined with his, no longer hidden or source of shame, but visible testament to courage, sacrifice, and the remarkable journey that had transformed them all. The portrait would hang for generations, documenting not just three individuals, but the moment when ancient class barriers yielded, however slightly, to recognition of human worth beyond birth and station.